Welcome to Boston Lyric Opera's pre-concert lecture for The Anonymous Lover, in French, L'Amant Anonyme, composed by Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges. My name is Allison Voth. I am the principal coach at Boston University's Opera Institute, and it is my pleasure and honor to talk to you today about this remarkable composer and his delightful opera. I will start off by saying Bologne was not just a remarkable composer. He was a remarkable man, a veritable Renaissance man who had an extraordinary life despite the socio-political odds stacked against him due to his mixed race and illegitimate birth. His life spanned the second half of the 18th century, a time when slavery was still legal in the French colonies, a time which saw the reigns of Louis XV and XVI, the last of the Bourbon monarchs to reign, and the time of the French Revolution and the Belgian and Austrian War. Bologne excelled at virtually everything he set out to accomplish due to his intellectual brilliance, extraordinary physical agility and strength, good looks, charm, kindness, innate diplomatic sensibility, and deep-seated humility. He was a highly respected violinist, composer, conductor, fencer, and military leader. Most men would be fortunate to excel at one of the above occupations, but Bologne excelled at all of the above. He was essentially a phenomenon and deserved to be included in the history annals and music canon of the Western world. But he wasn't, because he was a man of color, living in France, a country rife with deep-seated racism. It is hard to know where to start when talking about Joseph Bologne. If you were to research his name, you would find disturbing amounts of contradictory information regarding almost everything about him, including his date of birth, true name, spelling of the name, and who his father was. No doubt, continued research will reveal more definitive information, but I'll share what we have to date. Most of the biographical information we have about him, written during his lifetime, was not written by Bologne himself or music historians, but by well-known fencers writing treatises and memoirs, as well as by performers, composers, critics, and the high-profile nobles who wrote letters, articles, memories, and diaries. First, let me take you back to Bologne's roots. He was born on a plantation in Guadeloupe in 1745. His father, Georges Bologne de Saint-Georges, was a wealthy French plantation owner, and his mother, Nanon, a Senegalese woman who was enslaved. The de Saint-Georges referred to the area in which his plantation was situated. It was not uncommon for plantation owners to father mixed-race children, and, with sons in particular, claim them as their own and raise and educate them as free men. Since slavery was illegal in France, any plantation enslaved person brought to France was automatically free. Bologne was taken to France in 1753 at the age of 7 to begin his education first at a Jesuit school, and then at the age of 13 he was sent to the esteemed fencing school of Nicolas Texier-Laboussière. This was not just a school for fencing. Laboussière ensured that his pupils received a broad and noble education, including study of the classics and moral values, as well as dancing and music. Bologne was already showing promise as a violinist when he entered Laboussière's school. A source of biographical information about Bologne is a treatise written by Laboussière's son, Antoine Texier-Laboussière, who, 5 years younger than Bologne, became close friends with him. He revered Bologne and sang his praises in his Treatise of the Art of Weapons. This book included biographies of both his famed father and Bologne, along with detailed steps and lessons in fencing. Of Bologne, Laboussière wrote, and note he refers to Bologne as Saint-Georges, which I will explain later. Quote, "Perhaps the most extraordinary man ever known in fencing and even in all physical exercise was the famous Saint-Georges. One might well say of him what Ariosto said of Zerbino: nature made him and broke the mold." He continues, Saint-Georges had grown to a height of 5 feet 10 inches, exceptional for the time. He was very well built, with a prodigious strength of body and extraordinary vigor. Lively, supple, and slender, he astonished everyone with his agility. No one in the class showed more grace, more consistency. He made it a duty never to trick the opponent, that is, not to make false movements before beginning. And lastly, he made his gifts the more precious by the delicacy with which he pressed them upon others. He particularly liked children, Gentleness, goodness, and confidence were innate in him, and despite the spontaneity of his character, he watched his manner so well that no one could ever complain of a fit of temper on his part. I think it is important to note that Le Bussière does not just refer to his physical prowess as a fencer, but also to his integrity and genteel sensibility. Keep this in mind when you listen to his music in a few minutes. His personality of both a super athlete and a deeply sensitive man are heard in all his music. As Bologne's reputation spread, he fought matches against international fencing stars in Paris and in London, such as the British fencer Henry Angelo, who wrote in his memoir, quote, "No man ever united so much suppleness with so much strength. He excelled in all the bodily exercises in which he engaged, an excellent swimmer and skater." Angelo also apparently relayed the story about how Bologne impressed his young nobles by swimming one-armed across the Seine. The rigorous training in fencing and riding served Bologne well throughout his life. Early on, his great skill was recognized by the king, who appointed him as a gendarme in the king's guard at Versailles, a prestigious corps. With this appointment, he was also given the honorific Chevalier. Bologne added Chevalier to the formal family name created by his father, which referred to the plantation region de Saint-Georges. Therefore, from this point on, Joseph Bologne became known as Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Later in life, as the French Revolution was brewing and the Belgian-Austrian conflict was afoot, due to his esteemed reputation as a fencer and rider, he was appointed colonel of the first ever voluntary black regiment, which consisted of 1,000 volunteers for the cause. The regiment took on the name Légion Saint-Georges. They fought mostly in Lille, Belgium. As extraordinary a fencer as he was, after a humiliating defeat by the renowned Italian fencer Giuseppe Faldoni, Bologne turned his focus to music, performing as a violinist, conducting and composing, all of which he also excelled at. We do not know with whom he actually studied, but we do know he had close musical associations with François-Joseph Gossec, the esteemed composer and conductor who established the Concert des Amateurs, a private orchestra which was one of the first music organizations to act independently of the domineering church and palace music. Musicians could actually make a living independent of the whims of the clergy, royal patrons, or royal court conductor composers like Lully, who ruled with an iron grip. Despite the name Concert des Amateurs, this orchestra rivaled the earlier established Concert Spirituel, founded in 1725. Gossec hired Bologne as his principal violinist and also as the official timekeeper, an important position in any orchestra at the time. Apparently, metronomes were relatively new and were viewed with suspicion, so to ensure that the tempos were correct and maintained, orchestras had assigned timekeepers. Only musicians with composition skills could be timekeepers. Gossec was often away, so Bologne had the opportunity to conduct and lead the orchestra standing as he played, a privilege of the first violinist. Bologne's virtuosic playing quickly became known and respected in the elite music circles in Paris and throughout Europe. He was praised by the critics as a performer, conductor, and composer, and was of course sought after in aristocratic circles. There was no lack of invitations to the salons and eventually to Marie Antoinette's intimate circle, where he often performed. He was known for both his physically energized and deeply musical and moving playing. As a composer, he regularly performed his works for the nobles at their salons. His quartets were very popular in the salons, but he also premiered his own concerti and other works with the Concert des Amateurs, all to rave reviews. It must be noted that although the doors of the elite were open to Bologne as a musician and intellectual, the French Code Noir, Black Code, prevented him from ever being able to marry a noble white woman. The nobles loved to be entertained by him, but never would they deign to accept him into their circles through marriage. In fact, as far as record shows, he never married, even to someone from a lower social class. In 1773, Gossec left to conduct the Concert Spirituel Orchestra. Before leaving, he appointed Bologne as music director of the Concert des Amateurs. Bologne took that orchestra to even higher levels than Gossec attained. He held the position for 8 years. In only a few years, the brilliant Bologne established himself as one of Paris's leading performers and innovative composers. Violin concertos were written for him, and he composed many violin concertos which were full of technically demanding virtuosic passages. He was one of the first to write string quartets, and he innovated the symphonie concertante, a form of concerto writing for more than one soloist. Mozart and Haydn were both influenced by his symphonie concertante. Despite his busy performance schedule, he composed over 200 works, including 2 symphonies, 14 violin concertos, 2 wind concertos, 14 sonatas, 18 string quartets, 6 operas, and over 100 songs. His works were popular and respected. Please allow me to quickly take the time here to address the ubiquitous and persistent references to Bologna as the Black Mozart. I would like to put it on record that this misnomer is an egregiously racist and demeaning label, no matter the original intention. It should not be perpetuated in any way. Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, was not the black version of anyone else. He was 11 years Mozart's senior, and in fact, Mozart was more likely influenced by Bologne's innovations in composition and style. There is written record that Mozart and Bologna lodged at the same residence, the Chaussée d'Antin, for about a month in 1778. They surely had some sort of communication, but there is no record of the content of their conversations or of any music making together in letters by either Mozart or Bologna, or by outside sources. If any of you have seen the film Chevalier, you can be assured that the dueling violinist scene is completely fictional. In 1776, Bologna was so esteemed that Marie Antoinette recommended him as the next music director of the Académie Royale de Musique, the Paris Opera, which was in dire need of new leadership and artistic direction. Bologna was the perfect high-ranking musician with the skills to build it back up. However, not surprisingly, 3 of the Paris Opera leading ladies, Sophie Arnould, an old nemesis of Bologna's, and a fellow singer and dancer, sent a placet, or petition, to Marie Antoinette. According to French musicologist Gérard Goffin, this, quote, created as big a stir as a quarrel of the buffoons. That was an earlier divisive debate over the merits of French and Italian opera, too complicated to talk about in this lecture. Goffin continued, quote, their honor and the delicacy of their conscience would not permit them ever to be subject to the orders of a mulatto, end quote. The petition was a blow to Bologna, but ever the gentilhomme, rather than have Marie Antoinette lose face, he withdrew his name. Interestingly, the king assigned one of the penny counters to oversee the finances of the Paris Opera, but he left the artistic position unfilled. It was a deeply hurtful incident for Bologna, and it speaks to the stronghold of racism in France that a musician who had already contributed so much to the development of new musical genres of the time, and a musician to whom he had several works dedicated to and written for him by famous musicians such as Gossec, Haydn, and Lully, would be denied such a position merely based on the color of his skin. It did not take long, however, before several loyal friends in high positions stepped forward and offered him new support and opportunities. Philippe, Duc d'Orléans, stepped up and offered him fine lodgings and a pension. The Duke's mistress, Madame de Montesson, offered him the music director position of her privately owned theater, something more and more nobles were investing in. Bologna accepted, and several of his offers were premiered at Madame de Montesson's theater. Before I talk about his opera, I want to add that in the 1780s, Bologna was appointed as the conductor of the Freemasons' Olympique Orchestra. It was formed when the Concert des Amateurs closed for financial reasons. This position gave Bologna the opportunity to commission Haydn to write his 6 Paris symphonies. It took Haydn 2 years to write them. This was a unique opportunity for Haydn, as the unusually large orchestra offered him the chance to write for larger string sections than he was used to in Esterházy. Their first performance was in late 1787. It should be noted that this orchestra was funded by the Freemasons, of which Bologna was a member, along with Gossec and many other well-known musicians. Under Bologna's directorship, it also grew to be one of Paris's finest orchestras. Interestingly, the Freemasons were very forward-thinking and supported progressive ideas and teaching, for example, co-ed teaching. So, let's turn to Bologna's opera. He wrote 6 comic operas in total, only one of which survives in its entirety, The Anonymous Lover. Although not all of Bologne's operas were successful, his music was almost without exception praised. I'm happy to say that in large part, due to the Black Lives Matter movement in the US, The Anonymous Lover is currently seeing a grand revival being performed all over the country. The Anonymous Lover is the third opera and consists of an overture, 5 arias, one of which is an accompagnato recitative, 5 duets, 1 trio, 1 quartet, 1 quintet, a long dance section, and 1 short contradance at the end. This BLO production, a co-production with Opera Philadelphia under the direction of Dennis Whitehead Darling and Maestro David Angus, will not include all the dance numbers, but rather a short G major dance for the chorus and the contradance at the end. Maestro Angus is also adding an entr'acte excerpt from an orchestral work of Bologna, as well as an aria from Bologne's first opera, Ernestine. For those of you who might not know, French opera traditionally included extended dance scenes or movements, a tradition that carried over from the Baroque period. Handel operas certainly included dance scenes, but in general, the inclusion of extended dance scenes was not a consistent feature in German and Italian opera. The Anonymous Lover libretto is an adaptation by Desfontaines-Lavallee of a play by Madame de Genlis, well received at the time. Genlis was the niece of Madame de Montesson. It premiered on March 8, 1780, presumably in Madame de Montesson's theater. The BLO production features a readaptation of the spoken dialogue written by Obie winner Kirsten Greenidge. It is fresh, witty, and delightful. The Anonymous Lover is a charming story composed in the Comédie Française style, which is music with straight dialogue rather than recitative accompanied by keyboard and cello. Comédie Française does not mean it was a comedy, rather it featured stories of la vie quotidienne, everyday life. Carmen, for example, is a Comédie Française, which originally had spoken dialogue until accompanied recits replaced it. It's definitely not a comedy, as you know. The story revolves around Valcour, a tenor, a wealthy noble secretly in love with the beautiful Léontine, a soprano, soured by love, who has escaped to the countryside following the death of her unfaithful husband. Interestingly, she is a landowner and a socially independent woman, which was unheard of in those days and therefore very progressive for its time. In any case, for 4 years, Valcour, Léontine's dear friend and confidant, has been her secret anonymous lover, sending letters and gifts. It is now time for Valcour to reveal himself as her anonymous lover, and Léontine must decide if she will honor the request of her anonymous lover to carry a bouquet signifying her love of the anonymous lover. Both struggle with their tasks at hand. Much encouragement is given to both Valcour and Léontine by Ophémont, a baritone who is Léontine's advisor and a bit of a philanderer, and by Dorothée, a mezzo, a coquettish friend of Léontine's. There are 2 other smaller roles, a village young couple, Jeannette and Colin, who are blissfully in love and about to be married. It should be noted that the role of Dorothea was written as a spoken role and most probably was performed by Madame de Montesson, but in this BLO production, Dorothea will sing the earlier mentioned added aria from Bologne's Ernestine. I do not have time to play it, but it is a delightful addition to the opera. At times, the music in The Anonymous Lover has an infectious, almost Baroque-like rhythmic propulsion, and at other times a spare and vulnerable elegance that allows the text to be heard and expressed with little distraction. There are virtuosic violin passages throughout the opera that reflect the inner emotion or turmoil of the moment at hand. The first excerpt I would like to play for you is the opening air for Valcour. Bologne chooses a simple pastoral tune but cleverly uses a horn at the end of certain phrases. This could, at least to me, represent his hunt or chase for Léontine, since horns traditionally represent hunting. Have a quick listen. Very elegant lines, beautiful way to start the opera. The text will be, "My heart has asked for you so long, it is agony loving you, not knowing if you will love me back."
Depuis longtemps, nos cœurs
Listen again for the horn. Léontine has 3 arias in total, all of which are extremely challenging to sing. Her first ariette incorporates a Sturm und Drang, storm and stress, sensibility in C minor with octave leaps and extreme range. This aria shows Bologne's fondness for wide leaps in moments of angst or tension, and the intense, energetic, Baroque-like string accompaniment is palpable. Let's listen to the first aria. Big leaps. Sits very high. And just so you know, she was singing the words, "His love, his constant devotion has not changed my heart." Now let's listen to a bit of Léontine's third aria. Although still torn, her walls of defense against love are crumbling. We now hear a softness in Léontine's soul in the melodic lines, especially the descending lines which perhaps reveal her giving over to love. The aria is achingly moving. Fast line, violin line, always there, perhaps the agitation she still feels. But it is definitely, there's a softness that you will hear as she sings. Her soul is softening. And her words will be, "Such is love's power, you vainly defend yourself against its arrows." Next, I want to play you a short excerpt from Ophémon's aria due to its orchestration. Bologne's innovative use of woodwinds is evident here. His use of the bassoon in the bass line gives the aria a deeply plaintive feel. It is a very special moment, and he sings, "To love in secret for so long, that's my lot. Put me out of my misery. If I can't have love, give me death." There's the bassoon, sustained. Bologne could well have just used low strings, but he used that bassoon, and it's very special. The last excerpt I would like to play you is his brilliant Act One finale quintet. All of the ensembles are wonderful, and I wish I could play them all for you. But this ensemble is the most thrilling of all. It absolutely bubbles along with motives spilling over each other as each character finds his or her way through the emotional quagmire of the moment. My favorite part is hearing the oboe introduce a sustained line amidst the chaos. Then later we hear Valcourt sing it, and I'll point it out when it happens. It's beautiful and so aptly reflects his moment. She's upset, and everybody's upset that she's upset. Infectious energy. That's the oboe. Energy in the strings, always with Bologne. One more time. This brings my lecture on Joseph Bologne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, and his anonymous lover to an end. I will close by saying that late in Bologne's life, although he never stopped performing, Bologne spent the majority of his time as a military leader in support of the revolution. He, along with his friend Philippe, Duc d'Orléans, ultimately became an abolitionist and supported the 1789 Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizens, written by the Marquis de Lafayette at the beginning of the French Revolution. Despite this, during the Reign of Terror, he was thrown in prison for 11 months with no formal charges due to his long-time associations with the aristocracy and royalty. Miraculously, unlike many of his friends, he was not guillotined and was ultimately released in October 1794. That said, his life was considerably harder after his release, since many of his noble friends turned their backs on him for supporting the revolution. He died 5 years after his release of bladder cancer. It is my hope that you leave the theater inspired and thrilled to have heard a work by an early Black composer and remarkable Renaissance man. Remember that the reason many of you have not heard his opera until now is that his legacy was deliberately oppressed due to racism and individuals like Napoleon, who reinstated slavery and overtly eschewed, banned, or destroyed works by non-whites. Those scholars have long known of Joseph Bologne. Let us celebrate the general public finally learning about and hearing the musical works of Bologne. Let us all work to ensure that Bologne and his brilliance are never again forgotten, and that he lives on in our opera canon and discussions as a timeless beacon of inspiration and resilience for our young musicians, performers, and composers alike. Thank you.